Dear friends, welcome to Carmel Radiance Sunday Reflection. We are celebrating 22nd Sunday in Ordinary Time. In this Sunday, we have this beautiful Gospel passage from Luke chapter 14. When we are invited for a celebration, what do we experience? We always want to be accepted and appreciated, right? In today's Gospel, Luke chapter 14 verse 1, we are informed that Jesus had been invited for a dinner party at the house of a prominent Pharisee, which we could literally translate as a kind of arch Pharisee from the Greek archon. The adjective refers to a lead Pharisee, someone who was very high up in the Pharisee leadership structure. So it is likely that this man did not live in a modest small house in Jerusalem, but probably occupied a ritzy and large home to which on this particular Sabbath a lot of people had been invited. In fact, it may well have been the case that a Sabbath noon invitation to this man's house was the hottest deal in the town. But why was Jesus invited? He was not a real popular person among the Pharisees after all. Based on the text, I suspect he was not invited out of love and respect. But I cannot tell just what the motive really was either. There are several possibilities here. Perhaps it was born out of social necessity. The host didn't really want to invite him, but given his current popularity, etiquette, and impression he created among people, demanded that they not snub this new rabbi. Or perhaps there was an element of vanity in the invitation, precisely because Jesus' status seemed to be rising just then. Having him for dinner would be yet another feather in this Pharisee's social cap. Going deeper into the motivations of the Pharisee, it may also have been the case that they were setting Jesus up to catch him, to find fault with him. Personally, I accept this direction based on the fact that in verse 1, we are told that Jesus was being very carefully watched. Sometimes the best strategy to bring down your enemy is to get cozy with him or with her, make him or her relax and let his or her guard down, because then he might slip up, divulge a piece of information he shouldn't reveal. I suspect that this dynamic was partly behind these Pharisees having Jesus for dinner. As such, it is neither accidental nor coincidental that Jesus immediately encounters a man with dropsy. Dropsy was what today we would call edema, which likely meant his breathing was labored, his face, legs, feet, and hands were swollen because of a cardiopulmonary problem that caused fluid to build up throughout his body. Likely, he looked pathetic, and the Pharisees watched Jesus carefully. Could this Jesus, reputed to be a healer, resist the urge, considering it was the Sabbath, to help this fellow? In today's Gospel passage, we do not find an elaboration on this. Initially, Jesus seems to be the epitome of a polite guest asking his host and others, "Would it be all right by you if I healed this man? Is that a lawful thing to do on the Sabbath?" Did they all think this was such an obvious question it did not require an answer? Or did the way they all fixed Jesus in their collective glare as much as to tell Jesus that, of course, they considered it unlawful to heal a person on the Sabbath? But their silence dared Jesus to do it anyway, so he does. He then quotes some laws from Leviticus and Deuteronomy that allow exceptions on the Sabbath, injunctions against not working in the cases of sick children or suffering animals. It was an in-your-face kind of thing for Jesus to say, shaming them for their disapproval of this poor man's healing, and as the text makes it clear, leaving them with nothing to say. The dinner party is off to a real rocky start in this situation. But soon the butler rings his little bell, letting people know that it is time to be seated for the meal. And with a vague grin on his face, Jesus takes note of the polite yet indisputable jostling that begins as this guest and that guest angles his way toward the seats closest to the host's chair. Once again, it is Jesus who takes the lead here. You know, I was just thinking, when someone invites you to a wedding, don't try to sit at the head table on your own initiative. Next thing you know, the host has to ask you to move since the seat had been reserved for someone else, and then you will be so dreadfully embarrassed in the presence of all. Just sit in the back of the room. It's the humble way to go at life, and anyway, if then the host requests you to sit closer to the front of the room, you will have nothing to feel shamefaced about, but will actually be honored. Luke chapter 14, verses 17 to 14. The social matrix of this first century life is on display here, and we hear Jesus speak into this matrix both with communal wisdom and unexpected, even astonishing advice. We hear the setting for the story in chapter 14, verse 1. It is the Sabbath, and Jesus is invited to a meal at the house of a leading Pharisee after an interlude in which Luke narrates Jesus healing a man and defending that Sabbath healing. Luke focuses on the meal scene, a setting he strategically employs in his gospel. At the meal, Jesus observes how the guests chose the places of honor. His response, according to Luke, is twofold. First, he tells a parable. The point of the story is to discourage his listeners from seeking the most prestigious seats at the table to avoid the humiliating situation of being displaced by someone of greater prominence. Instead, they are to take the lowest place so that they might be elevated to a more honorable seat by their host. Jesus' summary comment to the parable is the well-known aphorism, "For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted." How are we to understand this first response of Jesus to the very explicit social ranking at meals? We might note initially that such social ranking was commonplace in Greco-Roman society. In fact, meals were situations that particularly highlighted social disparities in the first century world. There is a store of advice given about how to act at such meals. A Jewish wisdom book, Sirach, warns of being greedy and advises being deferential at such meals. Sirach chapter 31, verses 12 to 18. While this advice fits the tone of Jesus' remarks in Luke, Jesus goes further in warning against seeking out the most honorable seats. His exhortation is to pursue humility, a concept with significant status connotations. Humility was very rarely considered a virtue in Greco-Roman moral discourse. Yet, humility is to mark the followers of Jesus according to so much of the New Testament witnesses. So, what do we learn from this particular passage and a little parable? What might be striking to contemporary readers in this teaching of Jesus is that he does not castigate the system of honor at meals. Instead, he seems to assume it. Highest and lowest seats figure into his answer. This may be due to his particular audience in the story, the banquet guests. Jesus' advice addresses how to navigate the social setting into which they have been invited. When we move to, however, we hear a more counter-cultural message, one that addresses the fabric of the honor and status structures of the ancient world. Jesus, without using a parable, speaks directly to his host, the one who holds a greater measure of control over the rules of the game for this particular meal. His advice to this figure of power in the story works to undermine the very system that upholds status difference at meals. Jesus exhorts the host not to invite friends, family members, or the rich to meals in the subsequent teaching, since they are able to repay with the corresponding invitation. Such social reciprocity is the backbone of the patronage system endemic to the first century world. Instead, Jesus calls for inclusion of those who cannot return the invitation: the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. This group of persons resonates with the Isaiah-shaped mission of Jesus from Luke chapter 4, verse 18, with the poor and the blind mentioned explicitly there as recipients of Jesus' ministry. For Luke, Jesus subverts expectations that social payment and repayment should govern life in God's kingdom community. His promise is that God will repay such hospitality at the resurrection of the righteous. Since God is implied in the passive will be exalted, this kind of reversal of expectations and status is thematic in Luke. In fact, in the very next passage, our meal story continues with Jesus re-emphasizing the notion of inviting the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, which resonates very powerfully in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 25, where the king rewards all those people who did everything to the least of the brothers and sisters in the society. Dear friends, today's gospel is a powerful message to all of us. What is the powerful message here we get? We are all here in this world, as Pope Francis says, pilgrims of hope. Our hope lies not in the status, honor, power of this worldly reality around us, but our hope is somewhere else, because we are hoping to enter into God's kingdom. Those who are first will be last, and last will be first. So in our daily life, how do we look at this gospel passage practically realized? When we humble ourselves, when we are capable of relating ourselves with the poor, with those people who are suffering, with those people who are helpless, and also in our communities, in our families, wherever we are, in our institutions, in our parish, not looking for high positions, not looking for power, not looking for authority. We should be like Jesus. Though he was in the form of God, he did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped. And then our attitude towards the poor, those who are homeless, those who are helpless, what do we do? I have insisted it on various occasions in my homilies and teaching that whatever we have here in this world is not ours. Mysteriously, God has given us. If we are rich, if we are talented, if we are powerful, it comes from God, and we should be able to share those riches with those people who are less fortunate, who are poor. I always give the example, if you have $100, can you not spare $5 and give to the poor? Out of $100, $5 to the poor. That would be a great reward in the eternal life. We will be accumulating treasures for eternal life, where Jesus in the past 2 Sundays very clearly said, where moth does not destroy, thieves cannot steal. That is the powerful lesson Jesus gives us this Sunday. Dear friends, let this sink in our hearts, and let this really help us to renew our commitment to Jesus, who came to serve the poor, the least, and the lost, and helped us all to understand the mysteries of God's kingdom. God bless you.